The chill of the late autumn air always seemed to cling to the stones of the Grand Théâtre de l'Opéra, a grand, imposing edifice that dominated the city skyline like a slumbering giant. For me, Evangeline Moreau, a girl who had known little else but the cold indifference of the orphanage, the theatre was both a looming promise and a constant echoing threat. It was here, within these hallowed halls of velvet and gilded plaster, that my fate had been sealed, not by destiny, but by a desperate bargain struck in the dead of night. My voice, they said, was a gift, a rare, soaring soprano that held the promise of captivating audiences and stirring souls. It was a gift that had been my only currency, my only hope of escaping the grim walls of St. Agnes's orphanage. When a mysterious benefactor, a man known only as Monsieur Thorn, heard me sing during a rare visit from a patron of the arts, my life took a turn as dramatic and unsettling as any opera staged within those very walls. Monsieur Thorn never appeared in person. His negotiations were conducted through a stern, impeccably dressed lawyer, a man who spoke in hushed tones and whose eyes held a perpetual air of disapproval. The terms of the pact were clear, and to my desperate young mind astonishingly generous. In exchange for my exclusive dedication to my vocal training, overseen by the finest instructors the city had to offer, and for my eventual performances within the Grand Théâtre, Monsieur Thorn would provide for all my needs. A comfortable apartment, fine clothes, nourishing food, and the promise of a future far removed from the bleak existence I had always known. The single binding condition was that I would never seek to know Monsieur Thorn's identity and would communicate with him solely through his appointed intermediaries. He was a recluse, the lawyer explained, a man of unique sensibilities who preferred to remain unseen. Whispers followed his name, dark and intriguing tales of a disfigurement so severe that it had driven him to a life of shadow and seclusion within the very theatre he so generously supported. He was the phantom of the opera, a figure of myth and speculation among the theatre staff, a shadowy presence felt more than seen. For years I lived under this peculiar arrangement, my days filled with rigorous vocal exercises, language lessons, and the hushed reverence of the theatre itself. My instructors, the finest in the city, praised my talent and dedication. I blossomed under their tutelage, my voice gaining strength, range, and an emotional depth that surprised even myself. Yet, despite the comfort and the opportunity, a deep unease settled within me, a constant awareness of the unseen presence that held the strings of my life. I yearned to know the man who had plucked me from obscurity. Was he truly a monster, as the whispers suggested? Or was there more to the phantom of the opera than the terrifying legend? My curiosity was a dangerous flame, one I was constantly warned to keep banked. The pact was sacred, the lawyer reiterated on each of his infrequent visits. My future depended on my unwavering adherence to its terms. The night of my debut arrived with a dizzying rush of nerves and anticipation. I was to sing the lead role in a new production, a demanding soprano part that would either solidify my burgeoning career or shatter it before it truly began. As I stood in the wings, dressed in my elaborate costume, the hushed excitement of the packed auditorium palpable on the other side of the heavy velvet curtains, a strange, almost electric energy coursed through the theatre. It was as if the very air was charged with an unseen presence. Just moments before my cue, a small ornate box was delivered to my dressing room. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, lay a single perfect white rose, its petals as pure as moonlight. Attached to the stem was a small folded note bearing a single elegant initial, A. A shiver ran down my spine. This was the first direct acknowledgement I had ever received from Monsieur Thorn himself. A thrill of fear and excitement mingled within me. Was this a sign? Was the phantom watching? My cue arrived, and with a deep breath, I stepped onto the stage, the bright glare of the spotlights momentarily blinding. The orchestra swelled, the conductor's baton moved, and the music began to weave its magic around me. I sang as I had never sung before, pouring every ounce of my emotion, my training, my very soul into the performance. The audience was captivated, their silence broken only by the occasional collective gasp at a particularly soaring note. The performance was a triumph. The applause at the final curtain call was thunderous, a wave of appreciation that washed over me, leaving me breathless and exhilarated. Backstage, amidst the flurry of congratulations and excited chatter, the lawyer appeared, his usual stern expression softened by a hint of satisfaction. "Mademoiselle Moreau," he said, his voice lower than usual, "Monsieur Thorne was most pleased with your performance. Tonight marks a significant milestone in your pact. As agreed, the time has come for him to claim his due." A cold dread washed over me, extinguishing the warmth of my triumph. This was the night I had always known would come, the night the unseen benefactor would finally step out of the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest. What awaited me? The lawyer led me through a labyrinth of backstage corridors, down winding staircases I had never known existed, deeper into the bowels of the Grand Théâtre. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the distant echoing drips of water. We finally stopped before a heavy, unmarked door. The lawyer produced a key, its intricate design glinting in the dim light of a flickering gas lamp. "Beyond this door lies Monsieur Thorne's private sanctuary," he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are to enter alone. He awaits you." He unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit chamber. The air was heavy with the scent of old books, dust, and something else, something vaguely metallic and unsettling. The lawyer gave me a curt nod. "Remember the pact, Mademoiselle Moreau," he warned, his eyes grave. "Your future depends on it." Then he was gone, leaving me standing alone on the threshold, the heavy door creaking shut behind me, plunging me into a profound and terrifying solitude. I was finally in the lair of the phantom. My heart hammered against my ribs as I took a tentative step into the darkness, my voice catching in my throat as I whispered a single, trembling word. "Monsieur Thorne?" A soft, rustling sound came from the shadows at the far end of the room. And then, a voice, low and resonant, a voice that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me, broke the silence. "Welcome, Evangeline." The voice, when it came, was not the gravelly, monstrous rasp I had spent years imagining. It was a deep, resonant baritone, cultured and surprisingly gentle, yet it held a profound, unshakable sadness that seemed to seep into the very stones of the chamber. It was a voice that belonged not to a beast, but to a man who had known a great and terrible sorrow. My fear, which had been a frantic, sharp-edged thing, began to recede, replaced by a wave of intense, unnerving curiosity. I took another hesitant step into the room, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dim, flickering light of a single shaded gas lamp on a large, cluttered desk. The chamber was not a dungeon, as I had feared, but a strange and wonderful grotto of the mind. The walls were lined not with instruments of torture, but with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, overflowing with volumes of music, poetry, and complex treatises on acoustics and architecture. So magnificent but dusty pipe organ dominated one entire wall, its silent pipes like silver sentinels guarding a forgotten melody. In the center of the room, on a large drafting table, were intricate, hand-drawn blueprints of the theater itself, revealing secret passageways and hidden chambers. This was not the lair of a monster. It was the sanctuary of a brilliant, reclusive scholar. A figure detached itself from the deepest shadows near the organ and moved slowly into the faint pool of light. He was tall, his form cloaked in a simple, dark dressing gown that concealed his shape. But the most striking feature, the one that held my gaze captive, was the mask. It was not a theatrical mask of comedy or tragedy, but a simple, stark, and perfectly smooth half-mask of polished white porcelain. It covered the right side of his face, from his forehead to his jawline, leaving only his mouth, his chin, and his left eye visible. The visible side of his face was a study in paradoxes. His mouth was beautifully sculpted, a poet's mouth, but it was set in a firm, melancholic line. The skin of his jaw was pale, as if it rarely saw the sun, but it was his eye, his single, visible eye, that held me transfixed. It was a brilliant, intelligent shade of grey, the color of a stormy sea, and it was filled with a pain so profound, so raw, that it made my own heart ache in sympathy. This was not the eye of a monster. It was the eye of a man who had been terribly wounded. "You sang magnificently tonight, Evangeline," he said, his voice the same low, gentle murmur as before. He did not move closer, maintaining a respectful, almost fearful distance. "You have honored your part of our pact. You have a gift that is divine." "And you, Monsieur Thorn," I said, my own voice finding a new, surprising strength. "You are the one who gave me the chance to nurture that gift. I am in your debt." "A debt that is now paid in full," he replied. He gestured to a small, elegant table set for two in a corner of the room. "I had hoped you might join me for a small supper to celebrate your triumph." I looked at the table, at the fine china and the single perfect white rose in a crystal vase, and a wave of confusion washed over me. This was not the act of a monster claiming his due. It was the gesture of a gentleman. I do not understand," I whispered. "The whispers, the stories. They said you were a monster." He finished my sentence, a faint, bitter and self-mocking smile touching his lips. "Disfigured? A creature of the shadows? The rumors, I am afraid, are not entirely without truth." He moved closer then, and as he stepped more fully into the lamplight, I could see, for the first time, the faint, terrible tracery of scarred, puckered skin around the edge of the pristine white mask. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I simply looked at him, at the man who had hidden himself from the world, and my heart was filled not with horror, but with a profound, overwhelming wave of compassion. "I was an architect once," he said, his gaze distant, lost in a memory. "I helped design this very theater. I was young, ambitious. I believed in the beauty and the permanence of stone and steel." He paused, his single eye clouding with a pain that was still sharp, still raw. There was a fire. During the final stages of construction, a gas explosion in the lower levels, I was trapped. He did not need to speak the rest. The story was there, in the scarred edges of his mask, in the profound, aching sorrow in his voice. The fire had not just taken half his face, it had taken his life, his future, his belief in the beautiful, orderly world he had tried to build. It had turned him into a ghost in his own creation. "I am sorry," I whispered, the words so inadequate, so small in the face of his immense lifelong pain. He looked at me then, and the look in his eye was one of pure, unadulterated astonishment. "You are not afraid," he murmured, as if to himself. "You do not look away." "Why would I be afraid?" I asked, my voice soft but clear. "I am looking at a man who has suffered a great wound. I know something of wounds, monsieur. Some are on the skin, others are on the soul. Yours, it seemed to be in both places." My words, a simple empathetic acknowledgement of his complete pain, seemed to breach a dam within him. He sank into a nearby armchair, his tall frame suddenly looking fragile, his head in his hands. The formidable, mysterious phantom was gone, replaced by a man so thoroughly steeped in a decade of loneliness and grief that the sight of him made my own eyes fill with tears. I walked to him. I did not know what to do, what to say. So I did the only thing that felt right. I knelt before his chair and I began to sing. It was not a grand aria from the opera. It was a simple, quiet lullaby from the orphanage, a song of comfort, of peace, a melody my own mother had sung to me before she was gone. My voice, soft and clear, filled the silent, shadowed chamber, a balm of pure, simple sound. I sang for the boy who had lost his face, for the man who had lost his future, for the soul that had hidden itself in the darkness for a decade. I sang for the lonely ghost of the Grand Théâtre. When I finished, a profound silence settled over the room. He slowly lifted his head, and I saw that from beneath the edge of his pristine white mask, a single silent tear was tracing a path down the scarred, hidden landscape of his cheek. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and his fingers gently, almost reverently, touched my face. "You are not a singer, Evangeline Moreau," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. "You are a miracle." He then did something that stunned me into silence. With his other hand he slowly, hesitantly, reached for the edge of his mask. He was going to show me. The monster, the angel, the man. He was going to show me his true face. Time seemed to hold its breath in the shadowed chamber. The only sounds were the soft, hypnotic hiss of the gas lamp and the frantic, wild beating of my own heart. He stood before me, his hand trembling as it rested on the edge of his pristine white mask. This was the moment of ultimate trust, the final, terrifying surrender of a man who had spent a decade hiding his brokenness from the world. He was about to show me the monster the world had whispered about, and he was giving me the power to either accept him or to shatter him completely. Slowly, with a deliberate, almost painful grace, he unfastened the clasp at the back of his head and lowered the mask. The face he revealed was not a monster's. It was a tragedy. The left side of his face, the side I had come to know, was a masterpiece of classical sculpture. The high cheekbone, the strong jawline, the intelligent, melancholic grey eye. But the right side was a testament to the terrible, destructive artistry of fire. It was a landscape of pain, a geography of scars. The skin was a tapestry of puckered, discolored tissue that pulled at the corner of his beautifully sculpted mouth, twisting it into a permanent, faint grimace. His right eye was still there, a startling, brilliant grey, but it was surrounded by a web of scarred tissue that seemed to weigh down the lid, giving him an expression of perpetual, weary sorrow. The fire had taken his beauty, his symmetry, his right to move through the world unjudged. I did not gasp. I did not recoil. I did not look away. I simply looked at him, at all of him, at the beautiful man and the terrible wounds, and my heart was flooded with a wave of emotion so powerful it was a physical ache in my chest. It was not pity. It was a profound, overwhelming, and fiercely protective love. I saw not a monster, but a survivor, a beautiful broken man who had endured an unimaginable hell and had chosen to hide rather than to frighten the world with his pain. "Now you see," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing, his visible eyes searching my face for the inevitable flicker of horror, of disgust. "Now you see the monster of the opera." I did not speak. I simply raised my hand, my own fingers trembling, and I did what my heart was screaming at me to do. I gently, reverently touched the scarred side of his face. My fingers traced the raised, ruined landscape of his cheek, a silent act of acceptance, of reverence for the battle he had fought. He flinched at my touch, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, as if he had forgotten what a gentle human touch felt like. A single hot tear escaped from his wounded eye and rolled down his scarred cheek. "You are not a monster, Alistair Thorne," I whispered, my voice thick with my own unshed tears. "You are a man. And this," I said, my fingers still resting gently on his cheek, "is not a mark of monstrosity. It is a testament to your survival. It is the face of a man who walked through fire and did not burn away completely. It is the most courageous face I have ever seen. My words, my touch, my complete and utter lack of fear seemed to be his final undoing." A great, shuddering sob escaped him, the sound of a decade of grief and loneliness finally being released. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair, and he wept. He wept for the man he had been, for the life the fire had stolen, for the years he had spent in a dark, solitary prison of his own making. I held him, my arms a small, fragile sanctuary around his large, trembling frame. I was no longer a frightened orphan or his protégée. I was his equal, a fellow soul who understood the language of scars, and I held him as he finally, after 10 long years, allowed himself to grieve. After a long, long time, his sobs subsided. He pulled back, his face still wet with tears, but the profound, aching sadness in his visible eye had been replaced by a look of raw, unguarded vulnerability and a dawning, wondrous light of hope. "I have dreamed of this moment," he murmured, his voice husky. "And in my dreams you always screamed. You always ran." "Then your dreams were wrong," I said softly. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and a slow, beautiful and genuine smile touched his lips. It was the first true smile I had ever seen from him, and it was a revelation. It transformed his face, the tragic asymmetry of his features suddenly imbued with a breathtaking, noble beauty. "Come," he said, his voice stronger now. "The supper is getting cold." He led me to the small table, and for the first time we sat together not as a benefactor and his charge, but as two people. He told me the full story of the fire, of the agonizing recovery, of his retreat from a world that had recoiled in horror from his changed face. He told me of how he had inherited the theatre, his only remaining connection to the world of beauty he had once loved, and how he had devoted his life to it from the shadows, a ghost in his own creation. I, in turn, told him of my life at the orphanage, of my own quiet, lonely world, of my dreams of a life filled with music. We were two prisoners from two different kinds of prisons who had, against all odds, found the key to each other's cells. After we had eaten, he led me to the magnificent pipe organ that dominated the room. "My only true companion these past 10 years, he said, a note of sadness in his voice. He sat down and his long, elegant fingers began to move over the keys. The music that filled the chamber was a sound of breathtaking, heartbreaking beauty. It was a sound of profound loneliness, of a great and terrible sorrow, but it was also a sound of a fierce, defiant, and enduring love for the beauty of the world. It was the sound of his soul. He played for me for over an hour, and I listened, utterly transfixed. This was the true man, the genius, the artist, the soul that had been hidden behind a mask and a legend. When he finished, the last powerful note echoing in the silence, he turned to me. "Now you know all my secrets, Evangeline," he said softly. "The monster stands revealed." "I see no monster," I replied, my voice a quiet, unshakable vow. "I see only the man I am beginning to fall in love with." He rose from the organ and came to me, his steps no longer hesitant but sure and full of a new, powerful purpose. He took my face in his hands, his touch now confident and sure. "And I," he said, his voice a low, reverent whisper, "am already lost. I have been in love with you since the first note you sang in that dusty audition room. You were a light in my darkness, and I have been a moth, flying towards your beautiful, dangerous flame, ever since." He kissed me then. It was a kiss that held a decade of loneliness, of repressed passion, of a desperate, yearning hope. It was a kiss that sealed not a pact, but a promise, the promise of a new and beautiful opera, one they would write and live together. The phantom had found his angel. And the story was just beginning. The days that followed their first transformative kiss were a period of breathtaking, almost dizzying discovery. The subterranean chamber, once a lonely, shadowed prison for Alistair, was now their shared sanctuary, a secret world hidden from the prying eyes of the theatre above. The pact, with its cold, formal terms, had been dissolved, replaced by a new, unspoken covenant of the heart. Evangeline was no longer just his protégée. She was his partner, his confidant, the muse who had, against all odds, coaxed his own music back to life. Their life settled into a new, beautiful and intensely private rhythm. By day, Evangeline was the celebrated ingénue of the Grand Théâtre, her performances growing in power and emotional depth, fueled by the profound secret love that now illuminated her soul. The critics and the public adored her, hailing her as the greatest soprano of her generation. They spoke of the mysterious, almost divine quality of her voice, never knowing that she was singing not for them, but for an audience of one, a man who listened from the shadows of his private box, his heart resonating with every note she sang. After the final curtain call, after the bouquets had been gathered and the adoring fans had dispersed, her true life would begin. She would descend the winding secret staircases, leaving the bright artificial world of the stage behind, and enter the real, authentic world she had found with him. Their evenings were a symphony of shared passions. He, the man who had been a ghost in his own life, began to live again through her. He became her private and most brilliant tutor. He would sit with her at the grand piano, his long, elegant fingers guiding hers, teaching her the intricate theories of music that had been born in his own genius mind. He opened up the world of his vast library to her, reading her the poetry of Shelley and Byron, his deep, cultured voice giving the words a profound, aching beauty. He was no longer just her benefactor. He was her teacher, her intellectual equal, her dearest friend. She, in turn, was his healer. She did not try to drag him back into the world that had so cruelly rejected him. Instead, she brought the world to him. She would describe the bustling, vibrant life of the city, the changing fashions, the political gossip, painting vivid pictures for him with her words. But more than that, she brought him the gift of her unwavering, unconditional acceptance. She was not afraid of his scars. She would trace the ruined landscape of his face with a gentle, loving finger, her touch a constant healing balm that slowly began to erase the deeper, invisible wounds within. She learned the geography of his pain, and she loved him not in spite of it, but because of it. She loved the survivor, the man whose spirit was too beautiful to be extinguished by a mere fire. One evening, as they sat together at the magnificent pipe organ, he began to play a new melody. It was a piece unlike any he had played before. It was not a song of sorrow or of loneliness. It was a powerful, soaring, and breathtakingly beautiful opera, a symphony of two voices, a tenor and a soprano, intertwined in a story of a love that was born in darkness and redeemed by the light. "It is our story," he said, his voice a low, reverent murmur as his fingers flew across the keys. "I have been composing it in my mind for weeks. It is called The Angel in the Shadows." As he played, he began to sing the tenor part, his own voice rusty from a decade of disuse, a surprisingly powerful and emotional instrument. He sang of a man in a prison of his own making, of a life lived in a silent, lonely darkness. And he looked at her, his one good eye and the one that had been forever marked by sorrow, both shining with an overwhelming love. He was asking her to sing the other part, and she did. Her own glorious soprano voice rose to meet his, a soaring, brilliant counterpoint to his melancholic baritone. They sang together, their voices and their souls intertwining in a perfect, breathtaking harmony. They were no longer a composer and his singer. They were a single, unified work of art. The music they created was more beautiful, more powerful, and more true than anything either of them had ever created alone. The opera became their secret, shared project, the ultimate expression of their love. They worked on it for hours each day, a perfect, seamless collaboration of his musical genius and her profound, intuitive understanding of emotional storytelling. But their perfect subterranean world could not remain a secret forever. The world above had begun to notice the change in its brightest star. Evangeline's performances had taken on a new, almost supernatural power. She was singing with a passion, a depth of feeling that seemed to come from a place beyond mere technical skill. And there were whispers among the stagehands of a shadowy figure seen in the wings, of a deep, masculine voice sometimes heard harmonizing with hers from the depths of an empty theatre. The theatre's new director, a young, ambitious man named Monsieur Dubois, was particularly intrigued. He was a man who did not believe in ghosts. He believed in power, and he sensed a hidden power behind his new star. He began to watch her, his eyes sharp and calculating. The crisis came in the form of a new contract. Evangeline's initial pact with Monsieur Thorne had been for a single season. Her success had been so monumental that Dubois was determined to secure her for the long term. He presented her with a new, lavish contract, offering her a fortune and the promise of making her the most famous soprano in all of Europe. But the contract had a new insidious clause. It stipulated that she would be exclusively managed by him, that all her professional and implicitly her personal affairs would be under his control. It was a contract of ownership, a gilded cage that would trap her in the bright public world of the stage. "It is a magnificent offer, Evangeline," Alistair said, his voice carefully neutral as they reviewed the contract in their chamber. But she could see the profound, aching sadness in his eyes. To accept the contract would be to leave their secret world behind. To accept his world would be to lose her. "I will not sign it," she said simply. "You must," he countered, his voice full of a heartbreaking, selfless love. "This is your dream, your chance to have the life you deserve. I will not be the shadow that holds you back from the sun." "You are not a shadow, Alistair," she said, her own voice fierce with a love that was as powerful as his. "You are my son. My world is not on the stage upstairs, it is here with you." She looked at the contract, then back at him. "There is only one partnership that matters to me, and it is not with him." Her words, her choice, her absolute unwavering devotion was a gift more precious than any he had ever known. But he also knew that her refusal to sign the contract would be seen by Dubois not as an act of love, but as a declaration of war. The director would not rest until he had uncovered the secret of the man who held a greater claim on his star's heart than he did. The peace of their secret world was about to be shattered, and the phantom and his angel would have to fight for their love, not just in their opera, but in the real dangerous world that was coming for them. Monsieur Dubois was a man unaccustomed to being denied. He had risen to the directorship of the Grand Théâtre not through a profound love of art, but through a sharp, ruthless ambition and a talent for manipulating the vanities of others. In his mind, Evangeline Moreau was not just his star soprano, she was his creation, a piece of raw, unformed talent that he had intended to mold into the greatest sensation in Europe, a testament to his own genius. Her polite but firm refusal of his generous contract was not just a professional setback, it was a personal, infuriating insult. He could not comprehend it. What could possibly be more valuable to a young, unknown orphan than the fame, the fortune, the adoration of the world that he was offering her on a silver platter? The only logical answer, in his cynical worldview, was that there was another player in the game, another man with a rival claim. The whispers she had dismissed as nonsense, the rumors of a shadowy benefactor, a secret lover, now took on the hard, sharp edge of truth in his mind. Someone was controlling his star, and Dubois was a man who did not tolerate competition. His obsession with uncovering the truth became a quiet, methodical campaign. He began to watch Evangeline, his sharp, calculating eyes, missing nothing. He noted the way she would sometimes seem to be listening to a conversation no one else could hear, a faint, secret smile on her lips. He saw the new, profound depth of emotion in her performances, a passion that seemed to come from a source far deeper than mere acting. He used his authority to conduct a silent, insidious investigation. He would casually question the stagehands about her habits. Where did she go after the performances? Who were her friends? The answers were always the same. She was a creature of the theatre, a solitary soul who would disappear into its labyrinthine corridors and return to her small, respectable apartment alone. It was a perfect, impenetrable alibi. But Dubois knew that the most perfect alibis were often the ones hiding the most significant secrets. While the director's net began to tighten in the world above, the world below had never been more beautiful. In the quiet, subterranean sanctuary, Alistair and Evangeline were lost in their own shared universe. Their opera, The Angel in the Shadows, was nearing completion. It was a masterpiece, a work of breathtaking, heartbreaking beauty, a perfect fusion of his complex intellectual compositions and her raw, intuitive emotionality. They were no longer just two lovers. They were a single creative soul. Their love, free from the constraints of their initial, fearful pact, had deepened into a profound and comfortable intimacy. He, the man who had hidden his face from the world, now found he could be completely, unreservedly himself with her. She, the woman who had spent her life as a lonely orphan, had finally found her family, her home, in the arms of the man the world called a monster. "They are calling you La Voix Divine in the papers," he murmured one evening, as they worked together at the piano, his hands guiding hers over a particularly complex passage. The divine voice. "It is not my voice they are hearing," she whispered, turning to him, her eyes full of a love so deep it was a tangible presence in the room. "It is yours. It is ours. I am just the vessel for the music you have brought back to my soul." He kissed her then, a long, slow, and deeply contented kiss, the kiss of a man who had finally found his peace. The clue that would lead Dubois to their door came, as it so often does, from a small, insignificant detail. The director had a passion for rare books, and one afternoon, while browsing a dusty old bookshop, he came across a slim, privately printed volume of architectural theory. It was a brilliant, if eccentric, treatise on the acoustics of opera houses. The author was the building's original, and now legendary architect Alistair Thorne. Dubois bought the book, intrigued. That evening, as he watched Evangeline's performance from the wings, He heard her humming a soft, complex melody to herself as she waited for her cue. It was a beautiful, haunting tune he did not recognize. Later that week, while reading Thorne's architectural treatise, a single, scribbled bar of music in the book's margin made him freeze. It was the same melody. The exact same unique and impossibly complex tune. A jolt of triumphant, terrible realization shot through him. The ghost, the benefactor, the secret lover, it was him. Thorne. The phantom was real. The man who had supposedly vanished a decade ago had never left. He had been here all along, a ghost in his own creation, pulling the strings of his divine-voiced puppet. The discovery invigorated him, filling him with the thrill of a hunter closing in on his prey. He now had the key. The next day, he went not to the theatre's official archives but to the city's building commission. He used his authority as the director to request the original complete blueprints of the Grand Théâtre de l'Opéra, citing a need to plan for a new electrical system. He spent the entire night in his office, poring over the massive, complex drawings. And there, hidden in the intricate cross-hatch details of the lower levels, he found them. A series of unmarked passages, of forgotten storerooms, of a secret private world that existed beneath the public one. A world that led directly to a single, large and unaccounted-for chamber deep beneath the main stage. A slow, triumphant and cruel smile spread across his face. He had found the phantom's lair. The next evening, after the theatre was dark and silent, he did not go home. He took a single flickering gas lamp and a copy of the blueprints, and he began his descent. He navigated the dark, damp and forgotten corridors of the theatre's underbelly, his footsteps echoing in the profound, tomb-like silence. He finally arrived at a heavy, unmarked door, exactly where the blueprints had indicated it would be. It was locked, but a faint, almost imperceptible sliver of light shone from beneath it. And from within, he could hear the faint, beautiful sound of a piano playing. He stood there in the darkness, a silent, unseen voyeur, listening to the music. The hunt was over. He had found them. The fragile, beautiful secret world of the phantom and his angel was about to be shattered. And Monsieur Dubois, a man who believed in owning beautiful things, was ready to claim his prize. The music stopped, the final, perfect chord of their opera hanging in the air, a testament to the beautiful private world they had created. It was in that moment of peaceful, post-creative bliss that the sound came, a slow, deliberate and deeply ironic round of applause from the shadows near the entrance of the chamber. We both froze, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Alistair was on his feet in an instant, his body a formidable protective shield in front of me. He moved with a speed and a grace I had never seen before, the wounded recluse vanishing, replaced by a dangerous cornered animal. Monsieur Dubois stepped out of the darkness and into the faint pool of light from our desk lamp. He was smiling, a slow, triumphant, and utterly reptilian smile of a hunter who has finally cornered his prey. "Bravo," Dubois said, his voice dripping with a false theatrical admiration. "A truly moving performance. The Angel in the Shadows, is it? A fitting title. Though I believe the ending requires a slight revision." "What are you doing here, Dubois?" Alistair's voice was a low, dangerous growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate with a barely contained violence. "This is my private residence. You are trespassing." "Am I?" Dubois replied, feigning innocence as his sharp, calculating eyes swept over the magnificent hidden chamber. "I see no address on the door. I am merely exploring the fascinating, forgotten corners of my own theatre." And what a fascinating corner this is. The legendary Alistair Thorne, alive and well, living like a mole under his own stage, and with the divine Evangeline Moreau as his private muse. It is a story, my dear Thorne, that will sell more newspapers than any opera you could ever compose. The threat was clear. He held our secret in his hand, a weapon he was more than prepared to use. "What do you want?" I asked, my own voice finding its strength stepping out from behind Alistair to face our tormentor. Dubois' smile widened as he turned his attention to me. "Ah, the angel speaks," he purred. "What I want, mademoiselle, is simple. I want what is mine. Your voice, your talent, your future, they belong to the Grand Théâtre. They belong to me. You will sign the contract I offered you. You will leave this tomb, and you will take your rightful place as the star you were born to be. You will become the greatest soprano in Europe, under my exclusive management." "And if I refuse?" I challenged, my chin held high. "Then the world will learn the truth of the Phantom of the Opera," he said, his voice turning to ice. "They will learn of the monstrous, disfigured man who has kept you a prisoner in his lair, a Svengali controlling his innocent captive songbird. I will paint a picture so vile, so scandalous, that your adoring public will turn on you both in disgust. Your career will be over, your name a synonym for perversion." "And he," Dubois said with a final, contemptuous look at Alistair, "will be dragged from his shadows and exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of a world that has no pity for monsters. He will be utterly, completely destroyed." It was a perfect, brutal checkmate. He was offering me a choice between my own brilliant future and Alistair's utter ruin. I looked at Alistair. I saw the fury in his one good eye, the way his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists. He was ready to fight, to tear this man apart, to bring the entire temple crashing down around them rather than lose me. But I saw the deep, profound terror beneath his rage, the terror of being exposed, of being dragged back into the light to be scorned and pitied once more. It was his deepest, most primal fear, and in that moment I knew I could not let that happen. I had found my home in his shadows. I would not be the one to drag him screaming into a light he could not bear. I had to protect him, even if it meant sacrificing myself. I had to make the most difficult, most heartbreaking performance of my life. I turned my back on Alistair, refusing to meet his pleading, desperate gaze. I faced Dubois, my face a carefully constructed mask of cold, weary resignation. "You win, monsieur," I said, my voice a hollow whisper. "The life you offer, the fame, the adoration, it is what I have always wanted. I cannot let a man's sentimental affections stand in the way of my destiny." "Evangeline, no!" Alistair's voice was a raw, broken cry from behind me. I did not turn. I could not. To look at his face would be to break. "He is a ghost, a man living in the past," I continued, each word a dagger in my own heart. "I am young. I have a future. I choose the future. I choose the stage." I walked towards Dubois, my steps steady, my head held high. "I will sign your contract," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "On one condition: you will leave him in peace. You will never speak of this place or of him to anyone. The world can forget the Phantom ever existed. That is my price." Dubois looked from my determined face to Alistair's shattered one, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his lips. He had not just won, he had conquered. He had broken the Phantom's heart and claimed his angel. "A wise decision, mademoiselle," he purred. "I will have the contract drawn up in the morning." He offered me his arm. "Now, shall we return to the world of the living?" I took his arm, the touch of his skin making my own crawl. It was the moment of my great betrayal. I took one last heartbreaking look over my shoulder at Alistair. He stood alone in the center of his sanctuary, his face a mask of such profound, disbelieving agony that it shattered my soul. The light in his eyes, the light I had so painstakingly brought back to life, was gone, extinguished, leaving only the old familiar darkness. I turned and walked away with Dubois, my footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. I had saved the man I loved by pretending to betray him. I had agreed to enter a new gilded cage to protect his precious sacred darkness. But as I ascended the stairs, leaving my heart behind me in the shadows, I had no idea if he, or I, would ever recover from the wound I had just inflicted. My new life, under the watchful proprietary eye of Monsieur Dubois, was a masterpiece of luxurious misery. The world, which had once celebrated me as an artist, now saw me as a commodity, a beautiful songbird in a gilded cage, and Dubois was my proud, possessive owner. He moved me from my modest apartment into a lavish suite at the Ritz, a place of suffocating silk and cold, impersonal elegance. My days were a relentless, grueling schedule of rehearsals, of costume fittings, of interviews with fawning journalists where I was instructed to speak of my ambition, of my gratitude to my brilliant director, of anything and everything except the truth. I was a prisoner, I rarely left the hotel or the theatre, and when I did, it was always with Dubois at my side, his hand on my elbow, a constant proprietary reminder of who I belonged to. He paraded me at society functions, a beautiful, silent trophy, the divine-voiced orphan he had discovered and polished into a star. I played my part to perfection. I smiled. I was gracious. I was an empty, beautiful vessel. And with every passing day, a piece of my own soul withered and died. My performances at the opera reflected this. The critics and the public began to notice the change. My voice was as technically flawless as ever, my high notes as pure as crystal. But the heart, the soul, the raw, profound emotion that had once captivated the city was gone. I was singing beautifully, but I was no longer telling a story. I was a magnificent, wound-up automaton, and the key belonged to Monsieur Dubois. But the greatest torment was the silence from below. I knew Alistair was still there in his subterranean world. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand on the empty, silent stage, and I could almost feel his presence, a profound, aching void in the theatre that had once been his entire world. I had broken his heart to save him from the world's cruelty, but I had, in the process, destroyed the very light I had fallen in love with. The thought was a constant, agonizing pain. The culmination of Dubois' ambition and of my own private misery was to be the premiere of The Angel in the Shadows, our opera. Alistair's masterpiece. Dubois, in a final act of triumphant cruelty, had claimed the work as a discovery of his own, a lost score he had unearthed and adapted for his brilliant new star. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it was believed by all. The night of the premiere, the Grand Théâtre was a glittering sea of diamonds and expectation. The entire city had come to witness the event. As I stood in the wings, my heart a cold, dead weight in my chest, I felt a familiar electric presence in the air. I looked up towards the shadowed recesses of the royal box, the one Alistair had always occupied in secret, and I saw him, a faint, almost imperceptible silhouette in the darkness. He had come. He had come to witness the final public appropriation of his work, to watch the woman who had betrayed him sing the very songs they had created together. The opera began. I moved through the first act in a daze, my voice a beautiful, hollow instrument. I was singing the notes, but I was not living the story. But then came the final act. It contained the opera's most powerful and heartbreaking aria, a piece Alistair had written for me in the last blissful days before Dubois had discovered us. It was a song of a man in the shadows, a man who had found his light in a woman's love, a man who was now facing the prospect of losing her forever. It was his soul, set to music. As the orchestra began the haunting, familiar introduction, I looked up again at the shadowed box. I knew this was my last chance, my only chance. I could not speak to him. I could not write to him. But I could sing to him. I took a deep breath. And I sang. I did not sing for the audience. I did not sing for the critics. I did not sing for the smug, triumphant Dubois who watched from the wings. I sang for the ghost in the royal box. I sang for Alistair. My voice, which had been so controlled, so technically perfect, now broke free. It was filled with all the love, all the regret, all the heartbreaking, unspoken truth of the past few weeks. I sang of my betrayal, and my voice was a plea for forgiveness. I sang of my sacrifice, and my voice was a declaration of my unwavering love. I sang the beautiful, soaring melody he had written, but I infused it with the raw, agonizing pain of our shared story. It was not a performance. It was a confession, a prayer, a love letter sung across a crowded, silent room, from my heart directly to his. When the final, heartbreaking note faded into a profound, stunned silence, I held my gaze on the shadowed box, my entire soul laid bare. In the darkness of his private box, Alistair Thorne sat, frozen. He had come here tonight to witness the final, cruel twist of the knife, to watch the woman he loved perform a lie. But he had heard the truth. He had heard her voice, not the hollow instrument of the past weeks, but the voice he had fallen in love with, a voice full of a pain and a love that was a mirror of his own. He heard her confession, her secret message. He understood. Her betrayal had been a performance, a sacrifice. She had not abandoned him, she had been protecting him. The thunderous applause of the audience washed over him, a distant, irrelevant noise. The fire he thought had been extinguished, the love he thought he had lost now roared back to life, a ferocious, all-consuming inferno. The ghost of the opera was gone. In his place was a man in love, a man who had just been given back his hope, and a man who was now filled with a cold, clear, and absolute rage. He looked from the stage, where the woman he loved was taking a tearful, triumphant bow to the wings, where the man who had stolen her from him was smiling his smug, proprietary smile. The director thought he had won. He had no idea that the Phantom of the Opera was about to make his final and most dramatic appearance. The hunt was on. While the adoring audience was still on its feet, their thunderous applause echoing through the grand hall, a different kind of drama was unfolding backstage. Evangeline, her body trembling with the emotional aftermath of her performance, was immediately cornered by a triumphant Monsieur Dubois. "Magnificent, my dear," he purred, his eyes shining with a possessive, proprietary light. "A performance for the ages. You have made me a very powerful man tonight." He took her arm, his grip like a vice. "Come, the critics are waiting. It is time for you to tell them the story of how I discovered you." But before she could respond, a voice as cold and as sharp as a shard of ice cut through the chaotic backstage chatter. "I believe, Dubois," the voice said, "that you are mistaken. You did not discover her. You stole her, and tonight I have come to reclaim my property." They both turned. Alistair Thorne stood there, a figure of pure, cold, and terrifying fury. He was no longer a shadow. He had stepped out of his box and into the light. He was not wearing his mask. He stood before them, his scarred face a testament to the hell he had walked through, and the new hell he was about to unleash. The cast and crew who were bustling around them froze, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and a dawning, legendary awe. The Phantom was real. Dubois, for the first time, looked genuinely afraid. He was a bully, a man who preyed on the weak. He had no idea how to handle a direct confrontation with the very ghost he had sought to control. "Thorne," he stammered. "This is a misunderstanding. The girl, Alistair interrupted, his voice a low, dangerous growl as he took a step forward, "is the greatest artist this theatre has ever known, and you are nothing but a parasite, a man who feeds on the talent of others because he possesses none of his own." He stopped directly in front of them, his gaze fixed on Dubois, but his words were for Evangeline. "I heard you," he said, his voice now a raw, emotional murmur. "I heard every word you did not say. I heard your heart." "Stay out of this, Thorne," Dubois snarled, regaining a sliver of his courage. "She is under contract to me. She is mine. I have the law on my side." "Do you?" Alistair said, a slow, dangerous smile on his lips. "You seem to be forgetting something, Director. I may have been a ghost in this theatre for 10 years, but I am the ghost who designed the machine. I know where every wire is hidden, where every secret is kept, where every body is buried." He turned his attention to a portly, influential-looking man who had come backstage to offer his congratulations, the city's Minister of Culture. "Minister," Alistair said, his voice now calm and conversational, "a fascinating question of theatrical finance for you. Have you ever wondered how Monsieur Dubois, on his modest director's salary, has managed to acquire 3 new properties in the south of France this year?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Perhaps it is from the parallel set of accounting books he keeps in the hidden compartment behind the wall of his office, the one that documents the funds he has been systematically embezzling from this theatre's restoration fund for the past 2 years. Dubois' face went white. "I have, of course, taken the liberty of retrieving those books," Alistair continued smoothly, "along with the letters from the various sopranos you have harassed over the years. I believe the press will find them to be a far more interesting story than any fabricated tale about a phantom. It was a masterstroke, a perfect, brutal checkmate. He had used his intimate, secret knowledge of the theatre to completely and utterly destroy the man who had threatened their world." Dubois stood there, exposed, ruined, his entire life's ambition crumbling to dust around him. Alistair then held out his hand to Evangeline. She looked from the shattered, defeated man who had been her jailer to the magnificent, powerful, and beautiful man who was her savior, her partner, her heart. She pulled her arm from Dubois' grasp and walked to Alistair, her hand finding his. He pulled her into his arms, in front of the stunned, silent, and captivated backstage audience. "The performance is over, my love," he whispered for her ears only. "It is time to go home." He then turned, and with his arms securely around the woman he loved, he began to walk away. He did not lead her down the secret staircases to the world below. He led her out, through the backstage labyrinth and directly onto the still-lit, empty stage of the Grand Théâtre. He led her to the center of the stage, and in the ghost light of the now empty hall, he pulled her into a deep, passionate, and triumphant kiss. The phantom was no longer hiding in the shadows. He had stepped into the spotlight, on his own terms, to claim his angel. And as he kissed her, he could hear in the quiet of his own mended heart the sound of a new and infinitely more beautiful opera beginning. The fall of Monsieur Dubois was as swift as it was absolute. The evidence Alistair had so calmly presented to the Minister of Culture was irrefutable, a litany of embezzlement and abuse of power that could not be ignored. By the next morning, Dubois was gone, his tenure at the Grand Théâtre ending not with a grand exit, but with a quiet, ignominious dismissal. The story that circulated was one of financial impropriety, a tale of greed that, while scandalous, was a pale and merciful shadow of the deeper, more complex truth. Our secret, Alistair had ensured, remained safe. In his place, a new interim director was appointed by the ministry, a quiet, scholarly man who was a great admirer of Alistair's original architectural work and who was more than happy to allow the theatre's mysterious, legendary benefactor to continue to pull the strings from the shadows, as he always had. The theatre, which had been a place of torment under Dubois' reign, was now, once again, our sanctuary. But it was different. We were different. The phantom, the ghost who had haunted its corridors, was gone. In his place was Alistair, a man who, for the first time in a decade, was beginning to rediscover the joy of living in the light. Our life was no longer confined to the beautiful subterranean world he had built. We still spent our hours there, composing our opera, our love story set to music. But now we would also ascend. In the late hours of the night, long after the last of the cast and crew had departed, we would walk the empty, silent stage together, hand in hand. He would tell me stories of the theatre's construction, of the secrets hidden in its architecture. It was his creation, his kingdom, and he was finally proudly sharing it with his queen. We would sit together in the royal box, no longer shrouded in darkness, but with the soft house lights illuminating his face, both the beautiful and the scarred, and he would watch me rehearse on the stage below, his brilliant, insightful notes on my performance, a quiet, intimate conversation between a composer and his muse. Our love, born in secrets and forged in a shared, dangerous rebellion, now settled into a beautiful, profound, and deeply creative partnership. He was my teacher, my mentor, my composer. I was his singer, his inspiration, his bridge to a world he had long since abandoned. The question of our future, of what our life together would look like, was a constant, unspoken melody beneath the surface of our days. I was the toast of Paris, my name a beacon of light in the city's vibrant art scene. He was a man who, despite his newfound courage, was still most at home in his quiet, shadowed world. The answer came, as it so often did, through our music. Our opera, The Angel in the Shadows, was complete. It was a masterpiece, a work of such profound emotional power that we both knew it was the greatest thing either of us would ever create. One evening, as we sat in our chamber, the final, beautiful notes of the score lying on the piano before us, he turned to me, his one good eye, and the one that had been forever marked by sorrow, both shining with the same clear and certain light. "This opera," he said, his voice a low, reverent murmur, "it is not meant to be a secret, Evangeline. It is a story of redemption, of a love that is not afraid of the darkness. It deserves to be heard. We deserve to be heard." I knew what he was proposing. It was a terrifying, brilliant, and magnificent idea. "You want to stage it?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "Here? At the Grand Théâtre?" "I do," he said, a new, powerful confidence in his voice, but not with my name hidden in the shadows. Not as a lost score discovered by a new director, as a new work by Alistair Thorne. It was a declaration of his return to the world, a final, definitive shedding of the phantom's mask. "And you," he continued, taking my hands in his gaze intense and full of a love that was a tangible force. "I do not want you to sing the lead as my protégée. I want you to sing it as my partner, as my wife." He did not have a ring. He did not kneel. He did not need to. This was the most profound, most beautiful, and most fitting proposal he could have ever made. He was offering me not just his heart, but his art, his name, his very soul. He was asking me to be his partner on the greatest stage of all, their life. "The world will be shocked," I whispered, a joyful, tearful smile spreading across my face. "The reclusive genius and his orphan soprano." "Let them be shocked," he said, his own smile transforming his face, imbuing his scars with a noble, breathtaking beauty. "We will give them a love story for the ages, both on the stage and off of it. What do you say, Evangeline Moreau? Will you be my co-creator, my prima donna, my wife?" "Yes, Alistair," I said, my voice full of a happy, certain clarity. "Yes, in all things." He pulled me into his arms, and in the heart of their secret subterranean world, they made a new pact. Not one of patronage and servitude, but one of a shared, creative, and everlasting love. The final act of their own personal opera was about to begin. And it would be a story, they both knew, with a magnificent, triumphant, and breathtakingly beautiful finale. The announcement of the Grand Théâtre's next production sent a wave of electric excitement and baffled disbelief through the entire artistic world of Paris. The new opera, The Angel in the Shadows, was a complete unknown, but its composer was a legend reborn. Alistair Thorne, the enigmatic genius who had vanished a decade ago, was returning to the world. And its star, the divine Evangeline Moreau, was not just his muse. The city's most scandalous and romantic rumor had been confirmed. She was to be his wife. The months leading up to the premiere were a period of intense, joyous, and feverish creation. The theatre, once a place of secrets and shadows, was now a vibrant, open hub of artistic energy. Alistair, for the first time, took his rightful place not as a hidden phantom, but as the master of his own creation. He emerged from his subterranean world, and while he still preferred the quiet of the theatre to the noise of the city, he was no longer a recluse. He commanded the rehearsals with a brilliant, passionate authority, his vision for the opera absolute and inspiring. He still did not suffer fools gladly, and his standards were impossibly high, but his direction was no longer tinged with the bitterness of a wounded man. It was infused with the profound, joyful energy of a man who was, for the first time, creating not out of a sense of loneliness, but out of a spirit of shared love. He and Evangeline were a perfect team. He was the architect of the music, the mind. She was the heart of the story, the soul, her intuitive understanding of the opera's emotional core guiding not just her own performance, but that of the entire cast. Their wedding took place 2 weeks before the premiere. It was not the grand, public spectacle the city had hoped for. It was a small, intensely private and beautiful ceremony held on the vast, empty stage of the Grand Théâtre itself. Their only guests were the loyal cast and crew of their opera, the small artistic family they had created. They stood in the center of the stage, bathed in the soft, warm glow of a single ghost light, the vast, empty and silent auditorium their witness. Evangeline wore a simple, elegant gown of deep twilight blue silk. Alistair, in a handsome dark suit, looked at his bride, and the love in his eyes was so powerful, so profound, it seemed to fill the entire cavernous space. They exchanged simple vows, promises of a lifetime of shared music, of being each other's sanctuary, of a partnership in art and in life. When the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Alistair kissed his bride, a long, slow, and deeply loving kiss. And from the wings, from the orchestra pit, from the shadowed boxes, their small, devoted family erupted in a heartfelt, joyous applause that was more meaningful than any ovation from a sold-out house. The night of the premiere was a legendary event. The entire city of Paris seemed to be there, a glittering sea of diamonds, of silk, of expectation. In his old shadowed royal box sat Monsieur Dubois, a smaller, forgotten man, a quiet guest at the triumph of the very people he had tried to destroy. Backstage, Alistair gave his wife one last reassuring kiss. "Sing for them, my love," he whispered. "Sing our story." She stepped onto the stage, and from the moment the first haunting notes of the overture filled the air, the audience was transfixed. The opera was a masterpiece. It was the story of their love, a powerful allegorical tale of a shadowed composer and the angel whose voice brought him back into the light. It was a work of such raw, emotional honesty, of such breathtaking musical genius, that it transcended mere entertainment. It was a work of art that laid bare the very soul of its creators. Evangeline's performance was the one of a lifetime. She was not just singing the role, she was living it. Her voice, so full of her own journey of love, of loss, of sacrifice, and of triumphant redemptive joy, soared through the hall, a magnificent, divine instrument that held every single person in its spell. In the final breathtaking aria, as her character chose a life in the shadows with her beloved composer, over the bright, empty promises of the world, she looked up towards the royal box, her eyes finding her husband's, and she sang for him, and him alone. When the final note faded into a profound, stunned silence, the theatre seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat, and then it erupted. The applause was a thunderous, visceral roar, an overwhelming wave of emotion that shook the very foundations of the old theatre. They were called back for a dozen curtain calls, the stage showered with roses. Finally, Evangeline took her husband's hand and pulled him from the wings, out onto the stage with her. The reclusive genius, the phantom of the opera, stood before the world, his scarred face illuminated by the bright, warm glare of the spotlights. He was not hiding. He stood tall, his arm wrapped securely around his wife, his queen, his angel. The audience rose to its feet, their applause for the man and for the magnificent, beautiful love story he had shared with them, even greater than before. Later that night, long after the last of the adoring crowds had departed, they stood alone in their secret chamber below the stage, the scene of their first meeting. "You have given me back my life, Evangeline," Alistair said, his voice a low, reverent murmur as he pulled her into his arms. "You have given me back my music. You have given me back the world." "And you," she whispered, her head resting on his chest, her heart full of a quiet, perfect peace. "You have given me a home, you have given me a voice, you have given me a love greater than any opera ever written." He kissed her, a deep, contented kiss that spoke of a lifetime of shared music to come. Their story, the one they had written in the shadows and had finally, bravely shared with the world, was complete. The pact was fulfilled. The phantom had been redeemed. The angel had found her home, and their love, like the music they had created, would be eternal. The greatest art is born from our deepest truths. Do not be afraid of the scars that life has given you, for they are a testament to your survival and a source of your unique strength. A true partner is not one who hides you from the world, but one who gives you the courage to stand in the spotlight and share your true self. The most beautiful love stories are not about perfect people. They are about two imperfect souls who together compose a masterpiece of healing, acceptance, and shared harmony. YouTube description: The Orphan made a pact to sing for the phantom of the opera. But the night he claimed her, she saw the face of an angel. In the heart of 1920s Paris, a gifted orphan with a divine voice makes a dangerous pact with the mysterious unseen benefactor of the Grand Théâtre. Known only as the Phantom, he is a man of immense wealth and terrifying rumors, a disfigured monster who lives in the shadows. She agrees to be his protégée, her voice his possession, in exchange for a future she could only dream of. But the night he finally summons her to his secret subterranean lair, she discovers the shocking truth. He is not a monster, but a brilliant wounded composer, a man hiding from a world that scorned him. What begins as a fearful pact blossoms into a deep, powerful, and forbidden love, a partnership of two lonely souls who find in each other the one thing they have both been missing, a home for their hearts and their art. This epic and passionate tale of love, music, and redemption will transport you to the glamorous secret world of the 1920s Parisian opera, proving that true beauty is not in a flawless face, but in a courageous and loving soul.